Welcome back to Recap Film. Today I will show you a horror. This drama film from Indonesia aired in 2019 entitled Makmum, spoiler warning. Before we start, don't forget to click like, share, and subscribe. Let's start the Makmum horror movie.
At the beginning of the film, we are shown a female dormitory called Cerita dormitory, which hostel was deserted because there was a vacation, and there were only 3 people left in the place. In another place we are shown a woman. Her name is Rini. Rini, who works as a mortuary guard. Rini also has the ability to see and communicate with creatures from other realms. While at home, Rini contemplated and thought about returning to the dormitory where she grew up, namely Cerita dormitory. Next day mom landlord came to collect rent money to Rini. Rini pays the rent at the same time says goodbye to the landlord, which has now been picked up by the driver from the Cerita dormitory foundation, where on the way they saw a woman crossing the road. Rini asks Mr. Selamat to stop. Rini goes down and checks on the woman but Rini doesn't find her. Pak Selamat says that he didn't see anything either. Meanwhile we are shown an old woman who had a stroke and her name is Kanandi. She is the former head of the dormitory who is no longer active. Ma'am Kanandi saw strange things in the next room. She looked like she saw a woman praying, which when approached the figure was not there. Then a woman came to bring food for Bu Kanandi. Her name was Nurul. She was one of 3 people staying overnight even though she was on vacation.
Then Mrs. Kanandi asked Nurul to see the room. Is it true that there are women who pray? Nurul replies that he saw nothing and no one is here. On the other hand, Rini has arrived at the hostel where she wants to go to the room first. Then came 3 students who are still living in the dormitory, namely Nisa, Nurul, and Putri. They asked Rini if she was still living in the dormitory when she experienced strange things, and Nurul added whether during the prayer she experienced mystical things or something. Then came Mr. Selamat and Mrs. Rina, the new head of the dormitory, to replace Mrs. Kanandi. Mrs. Rose also invited Rini to help there but was not paid. After speaking, Rini went to her new room, where in the room there was a cupboard and suddenly the door opened. It seemed there was hijab pray in it. Rini also ventured to look into the cupboard after she approached suddenly. Rini also looked around and didn't find anything surprising. Rini went to the backyard of the dormitory where there were Nisa, Nurul, and Putri, who were cleaning the backyard. While they were cleaning, Mrs. Rose also came and invited 3 students to cook. Then Rini sat alone where she saw a woman dressed in white walking, which she saw on the way to the dormitory with Pak Selamat. Rini also followed the woman to a tree. After behind the tree the woman disappeared again. When he returned to the dormitory, he was surprised by Nurul, who asked for his help because Putri was in a trance. It was seen that Putri was in a trance and after how long she returned to normal. After that they took Putri to her room and told her to rest. Nurul also suggested to call Ustad but suddenly Mrs. Rosa came and said that the ghost didn't exist and there was no need to call Ustad. Then Rini went to the Ustads to ask for help. Rini was surprised that the cleric was her own friend. Then Rini also explained about what happened in the hostel, and Ustad Gand also told Rini not to hesitate to ask for his help if this really happened. At night Rini was seen helping Mrs. Kanandi. When Mrs. Kanandi was about to tell Rini through writing, suddenly a hand stopped her. Where it was the hand that haunted the dormitory. Then Mrs. Kanandi had a seizure and fainted. Rini also asked for help to Mr. Congratulations for bringing Mrs. Kanandi back to her room. Elsewhere, Nisa wakes up wanting to go to the bathroom and pray, asking Nurul to accompany her, but Nurul looks very sleepy and wants to continue sleeping. Suddenly Nisa saw Putri's figure walking. Nisa took the initiative to follow Putri, who she followed until the figure entered the toilet. Nisa knocked on the toilet door but there was no answer from inside. Suddenly the toilet door opens and Nisa enters. Behind the curtain, Nisa saw the shadow of someone who was taking a shower. Nisa looked behind the curtain and saw no one, and when she wanted to get out of the bathroom she couldn't open the door because it was locked, and from behind the curtain a figure walked towards Nisa, which made her hysterical and scared. Then Rini was seen, who heard Nisa's screams and immediately ran towards the source of the sound, and helped Nisa out of the bathroom with the help of Nurul and Putri. Then the 3 of them managed to get Nisa out of the bathroom. Nisa was seen sitting there crying. After that we moved places. Rini was seen doing the Aisha prayer. Suddenly Rini felt the presence of someone behind her following her prayer. After Rini finished praying she looked back and saw no one. Not long after that, Mr. Welcome to say that Bu Kanandi had disappeared. Rini immediately went with Mr. Selamat to look for Mrs. Kanandi, who had disappeared. Who then in Rosa's room saw Mrs. Kanandi, who surprised her because she saw that Mrs. Kanandi was already able to walk. Mrs. Kanandi approached her and immediately strangled Rosa and put something into Mrs. Rosa's mouth, which was the transfer of the ghost's body. possessed Mrs. Gandhi, who had previously been transferred into Rosa. Meanwhile, Mr. Selamat and Rini, who were still looking for Mrs. Gandhi, were suddenly surprised by Putri, who was already lying on the ground. Rini, who wanted to help Putri, was told by Mr. Selamat to enter Mrs. Gandhi's room because she was previously told to open the box at the door. Under Mrs. Gandhi's bed, then Mr. Selamat went to help Putri, who was lying down, and meanwhile Rini ran to Mrs. Gandhi's room to open the box in Mrs. Gandhi's room. When Mr. Selamat was helping Putri, suddenly there was Mrs. Rosa, who stabbed Mr. Selamat with scissors from behind, which was where Mr. Selamat tried to fight Mrs. Rosa, who was in a trance. Meanwhile, in Mrs. Gandhi, Rini's room, who had arrived to open the box that Mr. Selamat said earlier, where he found several pieces of old newspapers that reported that there were several missing dormitory students, which students were roommates with Rini. First, the student disappeared because of a fire earlier. While reading the contents of the box, suddenly the lights went out. Rini tried to get out of the room. Rini took an oil lamp and turned it on, but when she was walking, someone's hand grabbed her leg and she fell, and the oil lamp she was holding before fell, causing a fire. During the fire, Rini saw a scene where her roommate, after praying, turned on the oil lamp, where her friend forgot to put a glass protector on, which caused the fire and made her friend a victim of the fire. But after how long, somehow Ustad Ganda was in that place. He also tried to help Rini. He tried to enter through the window but to no avail. Then he tried to find another way to save Rini. Ustad Ganda also managed to enter and save Rini. Then they went to where Putri and Mr. Selamat was, where they saw Putri, who was still lying with Mrs. Rosa, and Mr. Selamat with full wounds. When Rini and Ustad Ganda tried to save Mr. Selamat and also Putri, Mr. Selamat told what really happened have occurred. When the fire incident happened, Ningsi, a friend of Rini's, became a victim, which caused her to have burns all over her body. Mrs. Gandhi also ordered Mr. Selamat to bury Ningsi's body that night because she didn't want other people to know, because later she could build a boarding school. The image can be closed and can be put in jail. After hearing the story, Ustad Ganda immediately ran to the dormitory, but when he entered, Ustad Ganda was blocked by a ghost wearing a prayer hijab. Ustad Ganda was attacked by the ghost so that he bounced far back. Ustad Ganda fought back by reciting the verses of the Holy Al-Quran, and that caused the spirit to disappear. Ustad Ganda entered the dormitory to save Nurul and Nisa, who were still trapped in the dormitory. When Ustad Ganda and Rini managed to save Nurul and Nisa, suddenly they were approached by Mrs. Rosa, who was in a trance, who intended to attack the four of them. Mrs. Rosa immediately pulled Nurul's body and lifted her. Rini also knew it was Ningsi. She asked Ningsi to forgive Mr. Selamat and Mrs. Gandhi, who finally brought Nurul back. Ustad Ganda also recited the chanting of the Holy Quran, which immediately expelled the ghost that was in Mrs. Rosa's body. After Mrs. Rosa was rescued, they rushed out of the dormitory, but they were blocked by a ghost in the form of Makmum, where Ustad Ganda immediately read the verse in the Quran, which immediately made the Makmum ghost burn and disappear. And after that we changed the packaging 2 years later, which saw Rini, who is married to Ustad Ganda and is pregnant with his child, which they then took a photo with all the students from the Cerita dormitory. And the movie is finished. With the end of Makmum, this video also ends, so I thank the viewers for watching. Thank you and see you in the next video.
1, 2, 3